So I'm glad you're here. I'm grateful to be able to study Torah with you. Let's say a blessing for studying Torah together, and then we'll begin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Blessed are you, source of life, our God, who makes us holy with your mitzvot and has given us the mitzvah of engaging in words of Torah. So we are in the middle of Leviticus right now. And this week is a double portion called Tazria Metzora. And Tazria Metzora are, it's a double portion this week, two of the most, and they are thematically connected, and they are two of the most obscure portions in the Torah. Every year when we get to Tazria Metzora, it's like, it feels like an anthropological chasm of conceptual universes that we feel that it feels like we have to somehow bridge in order to gather the mind of our ancestors, hopefully, and try to figure out what they were doing in this part of the Torah. And I'm going to track with you today both the most traditional in terms of Jewish rabbinic interpretation of this, of what they're doing, along with the more contemporary sort of anthropological lens that we can put on things. I find it to be very compelling, a very compelling take on these portions. So here's what's going on. There is a skin affliction described called tzara'at. The person who has the skin affliction is called Metzora. That's where the portion gets its name. When this was originally translated into English, it was translated in the King James Version as leprosy. And that's how the translations have taken it ever since. And if you understood that the Metzora, the person with this affliction, as a leper, well, the priest, who is essentially the ancient medicine man, would diagnose the skin affliction. And if indeed it was tzara'at, that person would be sent from the camp and put in some kind of quarantine. And after 7 days, the priest would re-examine. And if the affliction had gone away, the person could be reintegrated into the community. And so it's thought of traditionally, not traditionally, but because of the English translation that it acquired, which you can think of the 17th century or the 16th century, and that would be a logical kind of understanding of, well, what is this? Why do they have to leave the camp? The problem is that whatever tzara'at is has nothing to do with what we know to be leprosy. It has nothing to do with it. There's no, it's not considered to be contagious, as it were, infectious in the Torah. And interestingly enough, this skin miscoloration, which is carefully described in chapter 13, also applies, and this is where, is it related to the word tsuris? No, but maybe, because it's not related to the word tsuris in any straightforward way, but because so many Hebrew roots share letters that then grow out into different words. The word tsar means both constricted, it means trouble, it means an enemy. So And tzara'at maybe comes from that root. But no, I've never made that connection before. So thanks for mentioning it, Joe. So why we know it's not an infectious disease in the way we understand infectious diseases is because after it's described at length how it can affect a person's skin, it then describes the same word can affect a fabric. A fabric can become miscolored in this way and need to be repaired. And then it can also happen to the wall of a house. A wall of a house can get this affliction, this tzara'at. And that house has to be also treated, all of them, by the way, by the priest. So the priest is not a medical doctor, right? Nor is tzara'at a medical condition per se, if you follow what I mean. Because it's something that causes a miscoloration of the skin or of the clothing or of the house. So what are you hearing there? What am I hearing is that, yes, Susan, maybe it's like mold, but that's not the point as far as I can tell. Because the skin is what garbs our being. The clothes are what garb the skin. The house is what essentially garbs the person or the family. So we're dealing with the container becoming what's what I'm looking for? Forgive me. The container's losing its integrity. And the point is, as Lloyd, not soiled, because I don't want you to get the word dirty in your mind here. There's something else going on. And Lloyd puts his finger on it. It sounds more metaphorical than actual tarnished. Tarnished, good. The Hebrew word is tameh. And tameh, as I know we were discussing on your Torah on Monday, tameh usually gets translated as defiled. But there's something about but defiled also carries a connotation in our minds of dirty and somehow morally corrupt. That's the word I was looking for. The surface has become corrupted. Right? What was a container that had integrity, the miscoloration is a form of corruption. Now, Paul Bloom says, external embodies what had been kept secret inside. So we are going to enter the land of no longer complete. Right. The word integrity comes from the Latin word for whole, W-H-O-L-E. And so integrity means wholeness or completeness. The same is true in Hebrew. The Hebrew word for completeness or wholeness is shlemut, which you can hear the word shalom in there. Shalom, wholeness, completeness, integrity. And the other Hebrew word that's important to explore here is the word kadosh, holy, which comes from the root for whole, W-H-O-L-E. In fact, in Hebrew, we have these opposites. There's holy, which means kadosh. The opposite is called halal, which means to desecrate. But as far as I can tell, literally in Hebrew, halal is from, and I've taught this before, so forgive me if you've heard this many times. The word Khalil is a recorder in Hebrew, a flute. That's because it has cholalim in it. It has holes in it. And the word so halal, when we say it's a chilul Hashem, it's a desecration of God. It's almost as if you've punctured holes and corrupted the integrity of. Because when you say kiddush Hashem, it means you're sanctifying God, and somehow that means you're keeping a sense of sacred container. So Leviticus, for me, after much study, is best read from understanding an ancient worldview that sees everything as analogies. That the goal of the Torah, our purpose as a people, is to become a holy community, a goy kadosh, in which the presence of God can be manifest. If we desecrate that community, I was thinking of the prayer in Shachri, our body is made up of chalulim, chalulim, nikavim, nikavim, of holes and arteries. So halal means that you're, even outer space in ancient Hebrew is called halal, space, but that may be because of the ancient idea that the heavenly dome was perforated, and that's where the starlight came through, if you follow what I'm saying. So that's what I think anyway, as I try to imagine how these words might be related. So in an ancient worldview that is not logical, in other words, A, B, C, D, E, but is analogical, as above, so below, that is poetic in its referencing of self and the universe. The way Leviticus seems to work is that our goal is to create a home for God, a space in which the divine presence can dwell. And that goal, the way to do that is by being holy. That is, creating a container that can hold that energy. The way that container recapitulates on every level of containment. So the self is a home for God, or it isn't. The community is a home for God, or it isn't. The sacrificial animal that Leviticus spends so much time describing appears to be an analogy for the community. And I won't go into that discourse today, but it comes from this book by Mary Douglas that I've read many times. Called Leviticus as Literature. She even describes the written book itself as an analogy. The holy mountain that Moses ascends and the Mishkan, the Holy of Holies, are analogous. The body of the person is analogized in rabbinic literature to the sanctuary that the Israelites build in the wilderness. And so for them, holiness is recapitulating over and over again, and that the way we maintain it is by maintaining our integrity. One of the Hebrew names for integrity is achdut. Achdut comes from the root of echad, one, a sense of wholeness, unity. As I said, another word for integrity in Hebrew is shlemut. Shlemut comes from shalom and means wholeness. So in this poetic sense, is the only way I've successfully felt like I have some kind of grasp on what's going on in this week's Torah portion. I hope that introduction helps give us a frame of reference for where I'm going to go with this. Leah Taub said, please repeat your definition of the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is known in scholarly literature as the priestly manual, but that also comes from the ancient Hebrew. It's the Sefer HaLeviim. And the Levite's job as the ancient holistic practitioners of Israel was to be in charge of the rituals. No, this disease has never been identified, especially because it appears to be metaphorical, because the same name, Roni, is applied to people, to clothing, and to houses. I can't imagine, I mean, we could say, oh, is it a form of mold? Oh, is it this? Oh, is it that? But the same ritual is enacted to reintegrate people, clothing, and houses. So for me, there's nothing medical about it, right? That doesn't mean it doesn't have medical implications, but the way it's being treated here is not medical. For me, it just has to be metaphorical. Because what disease does a house get that clothing gets, that people get? Well, let's look at the word disease metaphorically. It means dis-ease, right? Something goes out of whack. And to create a holy community, a skilled practitioner, a good medicine man, I shouldn't say medicine man, a good shaman, male or female, their job, a good psychiatrist in modern parlance, right? Their job, their talent, their gift is the ritual of reintegration, of taking that which feels shattered and scattered and finding a way to bring it back into relationship. Which is why the remedy is ritualistic. It's a spiritual remedy. And the ritual, hey, while we're talking about that, let's look at the ritual of reintegration. It's wild. I'm going to share my screen and read the text with you now. I hope you can see that. This is our chapter, Metzora. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moses, saying, Zot tieh Torah Metzora. This shall be the ritual for a leper. And that's the translation still in use. But the Hebrew word is Metzora, and I repeat, it does not mean leprosy. At the time that he is to be cleansed, taharato, to be made pure again. When it has been reported to the priest. Now, in chapter 13, we already heard about how the Metzora has to go outside the camp and be isolated there. So the priest shall go outside the camp. If the priest sees that the leper has been healed of his scaly affection, the translators don't know what to do with this. The Metzora has been healed of his tzara'at. But we still, we're trying to translate it. I don't know how to translate it. Here's what the priest does. And now, I don't have the answer, to say the least. But let your mind sort of roam kind of metaphorically, poetically over this remedy. The priest shall order 2 live, clean birds, cedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop to be brought for him who is to be cleansed. The priest shall order one of the birds slaughtered over fresh water in an earthen vessel. And the priest shall take the live bird, along with the cedar wood, the crimson stuff and the hyssop, and dip them together with the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. He shall then sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the eruption, and cleanse him. And he shall let the live bird free in the open country. The one to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe in water, and then he shall be clean. After that, he may enter the camp, but he must remain outside his tent for 7 more days. On the 7th day, he shall shave off all his hair of head, beard, and eyebrows. His eyebrows. When he has shaved off all his hair, he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Then he shall be clean. It's not over yet. On the 8th day, he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, 1 ewe lamb in its first year without blemish, 3/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in for a meal offering, and 1 log of oil. And these shall be presented before the Lord with the man to be cleansed at the entrance of the tent of meeting by the priest who performs the cleansing. The priest shall take 1 of the male lambs and offer it with the log of oil as a guilt offering, and he shall elevate them as an elevation offering before the Lord. The lamb shall be slaughtered at the spot in the sacred area where the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered. For the guilt offering, like the sin offering, goes to the priest. It is most holy. And listen to this. The priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the ridge of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. And the priest shall then take some of the log of oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. And the priest shall dip his right finger in the oil that is in the palm of his left hand, and sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. And some of the oils left in his palm shall be put by the priest on the ridge of the right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. And then he, etc., etc. And then the burnt offering shall be slaughtered, and he shall be clean. And then it describes that if he is poor and can't afford 2 lambs, there's an alternative ritual. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Rabbi Ellen's reminding us that blood on the 3 places of the body is exactly the ritual that the priests go through when they're being consecrated. We see this before. Joan points out that these are energy points. Roni says, well, leprosy turned out to be a disease of non-feeling. The reason lepers lost their limbs was they had no feeling in their extremities and would bang and bruise their body part. Yes, that's true. The priests were the healers. They were the spiritual healers. And there are those, as we've discussed, who know more about incense and the properties of of essential oils, that look into this at great length in the Torah to see what the natural balancing and vibrational remedies were. So if we're going to stay with the leprosy image, the idea of not being able to feel is a good metaphor. Diane Kalel says, I read a book by a woman who developed a serious form of OCD as a Jewish teen. Yeah, I read about that book. She describes Leviticus as a treasure trove for people with OCD. Indeed. But if you think about it, Diane, we don't do these rituals anymore. To me, they clearly had a purpose in ancient Israel. So when I just read that to you, I imagined myself witnessing that ceremony. And and the meaning that suffused it. Because what happens at the end of this ceremony, this person who has somehow been disintegrated, had to leave the community, is now fully reintegrated. All their hair has been shaved off, so they're a newborn baby, and they are going through a ritual that reintegrates them into the community. Integrity, integration. Well, Diane, giving a diagnosis like OCD to an ancient ritual is a kind of cultural imperialism that I don't think we should do. I mean, what if we took that mindset without any internal understanding and went and watched a 4-day Indian sun dance and said, what the hell are they doing? You know, that's why for me, these kind of diagnoses are actually counterproductive to try and understand how a culture is making itself into a place where it feels like God's presence can dwell. Of course, that can also be an aspect of mental illness, but
I don't make that clear line between a disease and, you know, everything's a spectrum. So I think these people were doing rituals that help them feel better.
Yes.
It doesn't mean we have to give it a diagnosis, and I guess I did in my chat text, but it's along those lines. We do lots of rituals to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah.
It's only when they totally interfere with our lives that it becomes a disease, I guess.
Well, and I want to put it in a more elevated context, Diane, which is that they're not doing these rituals in order to make them feel better. They're doing these rituals in order to make them function better.
Right.
Right. And the function in ancient Israel is to make a dwelling place for the divine. That
Agreed.
is the most elevated function that we can imagine, to be a holy people, because to be a dwelling place for the divine in the Torah is a moral category.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We can't be a dwelling place for the divine unless we have integrity. When we feel like we've lost our integrity, how do we restore it? This is how what they went around about restoring it. So even if it was entirely symbolic and had no healing, physical healing characteristics at all, if everyone buys into that meaning system, then they can then regain their lives. They're not only feeling better, but they're able to function once again. And so it's not about the self so much as about the self's participation in a meaningful community.
Agreed. I will mute myself now.
Okay. I'm not going to be able to read these very long quotes from Joan, but I invite you to take a look at what she's been putting into the chat, because this is her gifted specialty. And Roni, I'm going to go by your comment as well, because I think we're still missing something here. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and say, so there's the ritual. It's alien to us. It was utterly meaningful to its participants at the time. And yet we've inherited this tradition. What have we inherited? And this is where the link through the rabbis becomes very important. Yeah, Roni, you don't have to buy a single thing I'm saying. That's fine. This is my attempt to try to understand what the Torah is. So hang in there and see. But if you decide it's all baloney, that's fine. Okay. So what the rabbis did, for whom integrity was everything, right? Just as is that they did a word play. And they took the word Metzora. Here, I'll share the screen again so you can see it. Remember, it was the King James Bible that decided Metzora was leprosy, okay? There's nothing in the text or anything before an attempt to translate the Torah into medieval English that says that this is leprosy. Metzora, the rabbis also didn't know what this was. But if you revocalize it, it becomes Motzi Ra. Motzi Ra, who brings out the bad. And the rabbi said that this affliction, this loss of integrity of the container, is the function of using speech harmfully. Motzi Ra. Now again, they're being fanciful, they're being analogical. All of this is speculation on our part. However, the Metzora means one who draws out the bad. As the rabbis tell it, a person who is Metzora has habitually spoken in hurtful ways, slander, tale-bearing, rumor mongering. That is, any use of language that can damage or destroy another's reputation. For the rabbis, tzara'at is the physical symptom of a spiritual disease. The Metzora draws out the bad rather than the good, using language to break down rather than build up. We could say that this person has loose lips and cannot contain themselves adequately. But saying, I couldn't contain myself, is never an adequate excuse. Conscience, empathy, and thinking before one speaks are all necessary preconditions for the experience of holiness. Those who leak harmful words have lost their integrity. Holiness and wholeness have been lost, and the divine presence cannot manifest there. I'm going to read a little more. This is some piece I wrote about it. According to Leviticus, the Metzora, the one afflicted with tzara'at, must leave the camp and wait 7 days. This does not appear to be a punishment, but rather a treatment. We might even speculate that this period outside the camp is an opportunity for reflection, a retreat of sorts. The Kohen, whose role is to maintain the dwelling place for God in the Israelite camp, carefully inspects the Metzora to see if they have healed. The Kohen then leads, if their skin is uniform once again, the Kohen then leads them through an elaborate ritual of reintegration into the community. The ritual includes an offering to God. The Hebrew term for offering is korban, which means drawing near. Healed and whole, the individual is now able to be intimate with God once more. Again, metaphorically, we might say that an inner state of disconnection or fragmentation has been resolved, and focus and energy have been restored. If our energy and attention are distracted, leaking, dissipated, we cannot remain aware of or address the great majesty and mystery in which we dwell, and which dwells within each of us. The Kohen might be thought of as the spiritual healer who examines us carefully and guides us back into connection with the divine. So again, let me just so again, we have a giant act of imagination to do here, to try to get. And what we get will not be verifiable or provable, but to try to get. So there's the instructions I read, the hyssop, the birds, the setting one bird free, the slaughtering of the other bird, the shaving, the blood on the body parts. It's like, holy smokes. Okay. But what the book can't communicate is what the intention, what that chapter can't communicate is what the intention behind this ritual is. But we can guess what the intention is by reading the rest of the Torah, where it becomes clear that the purpose of being part of the community of Israel is to be a holy people who make a dwelling place for God, for the divine energy. So I don't think it's so much of a leap once you understand what the priest's purpose is, to restore this person to the holy community so that they can continue to make a dwelling place for the divine presence within, among, and around. Then I humbly submit that cultures develop rituals in order to restore a sense of connection between ourselves, within ourselves, between each other, and with life or God as we understand it. Those rituals are only rituals. By themselves, ritual actions are empty. However, if there is a shared sense of common purpose, and it's understood that the ritual's purpose is to reinforce that among us, then the ritual becomes incredibly powerful. Think about Yom Kippur. That is our modern way annually of asking for forgiveness, plugging up the holes in our integrity, and reintegrating ourselves into a holy community. That's how we do it. That's how Judaism has evolved over the last 3,000 years. Paul says rituals do not think rituals are arbitrarily chosen. They actually work. They actually work they actually work, and they especially work when people enter them with a sense of knowing why they're doing it. So for example, we had a bar mitzvah here last week, two Shabbases ago. And the dad wrote me afterwards and he said, I felt like I could see my son growing up before my eyes. And he was astounded. So the ritual worked. The more that we as a community accept the veracity of the ritual, the purpose of it, the more it works, right? The more people under our tent on Yom Kippur, our figurative tent last year, that have bought into the purpose of us being together is that we might restore a sense of internal and communal wholeness. The more people that do that, the more successful the ritual is. The fewer people that have that consciousness, the more boring the ritual is, right? Because this ritual is boring. Listen to what it's like the bird and the this and this. Okay, when do we eat? So so that's what I try to imagine is what the purpose of the ritual was. And the degree to which that culture bought into it was the degree to which it would be effective. And this bar mitzvah the week before last surprised the family because the power of the ritual overwhelmed any scatteredness or lack of understanding that they might have had, and kind of just carried them away. It was amazing, actually. No, Roni, the ritual in Leviticus is not isolating. This is public. And having someone leave the camp is not necessarily a punishment, but may have been considered a treatment. You're applying a lot of your judgments to something we know very little about. So perhaps being sent out of the camp for 7 days, if everyone understands that it's not a punishment, but a treatment, then maybe they're going to the spa. Who says that being outside we don't know. We immediately we always have to check our categories. And I submit to you that our categories of how we understand this ritual are not necessarily remotely accurate, especially on the first or second reading. Yes, like a sabbatical. Thank you, Sarah. Now, that doesn't mean I understand it. It means that I want to validate it. It means that the Torah is putting it there for a purpose. That this isn't some random ancient bunch of like malarkey, right? Why would it be? It was ultimately meaningful to the people who created it. So why don't we treat it that way, as I'm doing today, and understand it as such? A Jewish version of the Roman baths, Joan, that's a whole other story. The rabbis had a very mixed feelings about the Roman baths, not to mention their vomitoriums. So pleasure for pleasure's sake was definitely not the ancient Jewish understanding. It had to be sanctified.
I'd say lahavdil.
Pardon?
Lahavdil. Pleasure.
No, lahavdil. Right, Joe. Okay. All right, so let's see, where do I want to go now? Yes, what I want to talk about then is the message I take from this portion most of the time, and it's always changing, but most of the time, is if the rabbis say that the loss of integrity was a result of using the way we talk about people to break them down instead of to build them up, whether in their presence or worse, not in their presence. Well, if we use our speech to bring out the bad, which is what Metzora means, then we are destroying the fabric of our community. We're punching holes in it. Now, these days, it's hard to even figure out whether our community is holding together, right? Our civic community. And that's on a large scale. But think about your family unit, your loved ones, the people with whom you try to maintain a sense of sanctity in your relationships, who you want to build up, who you want to help be who they're supposed to be. So the rabbi saw the use of language indiscriminately, cruelly, carelessly, as one of the ways that we puncture holes in the integrity of our vessel. And we have these the 2,000-year-old Jewish remedies for this is the function called teshuvah. Teshuvah is how you restore integrity. And ever since the sacrificial system of Judaism came to an end, this more relational one became more and more important. There's a famous line in the prophet Hosea that says, "Come to me with your words, the fruit of your lips, so that you might be, I might take you back again." So the genuine I'm sorries, So the modern way of, not the modern way, the 2,000-year-old Jewish way of restoring integrity to the community has to do very much with language. Yes, for the rabbis, Lashon Hara, the evil use of speech, was even considered to be one of the causes of the destruction of the temple. And if you put it in the metaphors we're using today, the holy place where God's presence dwelled could not withstand being punctured, desecrated, frayed and torn to the edges with the way we were destroying each other with language. Certainly, we're experiencing that in our country right now. We do not know if the body of democracy, and I'm using the word body intentionally, this is all about the integrity of the body, can withstand the number of holes that are being blown through it daily at this point. Yes, the body politic, as Rabbi Ellen reminds us. So again, I want to bring us back now, not to the details of the ritual, but to me, the clear analogical thinking of the Torah. Because remember, this portion treats the same disease, which we don't know how to name, when it happens to the skin, when it happens to the clothing, or when it happens to the dwelling. The priest's ritual, when you read the portion carefully, is the same for each one. The house has to be treated with the two doves and the two birds, and it's the same treatment. Whatever that treatment was, which we can picture, what it meant is the most important thing. What it symbolized. And so it was not a physical cure. Because I'm telling you, you just read, it's right in front of us. The skin, the clothing, and the house, it's about the body. It's about the container. For me, this is the teaching that I draw from this portion. How do we keep the body, the home, the community, how do we keep it from being desecrated, from having holes punched in it, from having the air go out of it, the sense of possibility, the sense of togetherness, the sense of common purpose? The Jewish common purpose is to be a holy community that creates a home for God. And this is both done through our ritual behaviors, but primarily through our ethical behaviors. The week after next, the Torah portion is called Kedoshim, and it is the centerpiece of Leviticus, and it is the portion that says, love your neighbor as yourself, you shall be holy, for I, Yod-Heh-Vav, your God, am holy. And so it's clear when you read the book in sequence that what the priests are trying to recreate here is a community in which people love each other and treat each other the way they should be treated. And we all know that's the key. We all know that's the key. It's the golden rule. It's the key to creating a society, a home, an individual in which God's presence can dwell. Joan says quintessential humanism. Yes, I like to call it religious humanism. I like to mess people up and say, I'm a religious humanist. I believe there's a moral law to the universe, and I believe it only becomes manifest through human action. And Abigail made a beautiful comment here. Self-clothing home is an extension of the Mishkan. Let's play with that metaphor. Think of all the chapters. Thank you, Abigail. This is what it makes me think of. Think of all the chapters in Exodus that describe the clothing of the high priest and the construction of the Mishkan and the preparation of the high priest, which is exactly the same as the ritual for the person who has tzara'at. The high priest, when they are going to, before they can enter the sanctuary, they have, and when they're invested as priests, they have the same ritual, the blood on the ear, the thumb, the toe, the whole thing, the bathing, the reclothing. So in that sense, and this is very real in Judaism, we are each the high priest. Each of us must be preparing ourselves to go into the Holy of Holies and be a vessel for the divine presence. In fact, and I'll read some more of these comments in a moment, in fact, in the Jewish tahara ritual. And this, the word tahar, which we haven't talked about, means to make pure or make clean, unblemished. It's the opposite of defiled just like kadosh, holy, is the opposite of halal, which means desecrated or having holes punched in it. Tahor is the opposite of tameh. So why I'm telling you that is that the ritual for preparing a body after a person is deceased is called tahara, preparing the body to meet its maker. And the ritual, some of us here participate in this ritual, is that when you're washing the body and clothing it and preparing it for burial, you're reciting the verses of how the high priest would get ready to go into the Holy of Holies and meet God. Rob said, is there something to the metaphor of this boundary that isn't static but has holes, that allows stuff to come in and out and isn't hard and fast? Oh, that's good, Rob. Clearly, this boundary has to have some osmosis, has to be permeable in some regard. It's not a rigid structure. At the same time, so where that makes my mind play, Rob, is that if our pores aren't working, we're going to die, right? If our openings and orifices, aren't functioning well, we're going to either lose all our energy and die, or get so constipated with energy that has to move that we'll die. So clearly there's this incredible dynamic being quality to a healthy organism. That's such a dynamic balance of permeability and stasis, it's amazing. The blessing that we say in the morning blessings in gratitude for our body is, thank you, God, for opening what should be opened and blocking up what should be closed. If any of our openings was closed when it should be open, or open when it should be closed, we couldn't even stay alive or stand before you. So yes, the idea of a sacred container has to be understood. Can't be taken into an impermeable container, definitely. Thanks for mentioning that. A seamless production, very nice. Seamless is a nice word when you watch a piece of theater and it seems seamless. You've entered a sacred reality. I love thinking about theater and its roots in ritual and how it brings us into another reality and hopefully transforms us. Porosity, let's say it's better to consider the principle as flow. Definitely, since God's name is, I am becoming what I am becoming, then here's where metaphors will fail us. To become a suitable container for that which is becoming means it's a paradox. It means we cannot be static in any way. So the challenge of being a holy community is such a beautiful and impossible challenge. We need to be constantly recalibrating. We need to be present. We need to be paying attention, and we need to be carrying our core principles with us at all times while situations change, so that we can apply ourselves. Oh, I like thinking about that. Ear, thumb, and toe is a metaphor for the aspects of Behavta, according to Gail Albert. You shall love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. Energy must flow to remain healthy, never stagnate. That's why our Jewish lives are devoted to cyclical behavior. Continuous relation to the calendar allows us to refresh these sacred behaviors and make them new. That's why we're reconstructionists. Lovely. Refresh, what a beautiful word. Is the person being reintegrated into the community fully refreshed? The traditional word for Shabbat, for being refreshed, is vayinafash, which means their soul has been restored to their body. That's a beautiful, yes, I love that word. Let's be refreshed, continuously refreshed. Thank you. Very good, very good. Yes, impure, liminal, susceptible, in a zone where you have to take great care to resonate with the flow of life whose current can change. And of course, the I Ching and Eastern traditions are about balance in terms of flow. And I dare say that our mistake on Judaism is the product of our 19th and 20th century worldviews and is in no way an accurate reflection of the intention of Jewish practice and teaching. I think it's one of the things that happens when gross materialism takes over our understanding of how the world works. We then can only read this chapter in Leviticus as a bizarre set of activities because we've been trained in a particular worldview that cuts out the idea of divine flow everywhere. What is it about human nature that propelled us to kill animals as a ritual? Again, I won't have time. Let's raise this question another time. It is about human nature because for sustenance, in native peoples, indigenous peoples all over the world have taken their animals' lives and for their own sustenance. So it's a good question. Vayinafash is related to nefesh. Yes, spirit, exactly. I Ching is the rules of change and sometimes imbalance and sometimes not. Correct. What about killing fellow humans as a ritual? Fortunately, it's not part of the Jewish worldview at all. Beautiful. Okay, I think we used up our time. I hope this has been stimulating. That's certainly my goal, but also stimulating towards that idea of what it means to be a holy person, a holy community, to see holiness and welcome God's energy into the entire consciousness of ourselves and the world. So, thank you, everybody.